Let's welcome Dr. Snyder once again.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Glad you could make it back tonight. We're going to continue on looking how we can optimize our health. Okay, so I'm getting some feedback here, Chris. So let's see if we can stop that. Try that. Okay, let's try that. Is that better? Didn't sound like that was the feeding back. So, okay. So I think I'm actually going to, wish I had this here. Sorry, I'm going to move this real quick. There we go. That'll work. All right, everybody see this okay? Yeah. All right, let's get going. So last night we talked about the New Start acronym with the 8 natural doctors: nutrition, exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, air, rest, and trusting God. These are the 8 natural doctors we teach in our program to help you optimize your health. We talked a lot last night about how we want to improve our immunity and how there was looking at the risk for lifestyle disease and the risk for infectious disease, how they cross over. We see that for both immunity and for good health, the principles on how to take care of your body and how to live are the same. And so that will help us in the days of COVID to be at less risk for death or serious morbidity from COVID. So we talked about those. Well, let me back up just a little bit here. So we talked about those, and we focus mostly on the nutrition aspect here in this seminar, but I will have a short segment where I go through all 8 of them. Maybe tomorrow night or the night after, we'll see how that fits into the schedule. But it's not just nutrition, it's exercise, making sure that we're getting plenty of exercise, because no matter what we do, and I tell my patients this all the time, if you are eating more calories than you're burning, you are going to gain weight. If you're burning more calories than you're eating, then you're going to lose weight. And we want to be active and healthy, eating the good foods, and our body will optimize at a weight that's perfect for our activity level, our size, and so forth, and according to our diet. When I was training at Weimar, where we learned the New Start principles, it was really interesting to me. I found it fascinating that, you know, a lot of the people that go there, they're going there for lifestyle diseases, and they're mainly treating obesity, and they're treating diabetes and heart disease. Those are kind of the big 3 that they're dealing with. But there were cancer patients there too, and the cancer patients, there were 2 in particular that were there when I was there, and both of them were in the dwindle stage where they're ready to die. The doctors had basically told them, go, you know, get your affairs together because there's nothing more that we can do. So they're like 78 pounds, you know, and just skin and bones. And so they came to Weimar, and Weimar puts them on their program. They add some special juicing, kind of like what you guys are drinking tonight, and they were able to put weight on. And so the body does adjust to the diet and the activity level that you live. So I found that rather fascinating. So good clean water is important, sunlight is important, temperance. What do we mean by temperance? That means that we shouldn't be putting things in our body that don't belong there. So we talked a little bit about lifestyle modifications that we can do to help ourselves, and one of them was smoking, one of them was drinking, and so we should be avoiding things that are harmful to our body, and then using the things that are healthy for our body in a moderate way. And then fresh air. We don't have a lot of problems here in our area with fresh air. Inner city may be more problematic. But you got to think about, you know, when you're sleeping, a lot of people close up their house, they run their air conditioner, they run their heat or whatever, and they're not really getting fresh air while they sleep. And so that might be a place where you could modify your sleep. And then rest, we're going to talk about the different aspects of rest because there's more than one rest. And so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about trusting in God because You know, in my mind as a Christian, if we look at these principles here, they're pretty much meaningless. I liken it to the guy who's really physically fit. He works out at the gym. He has a great job. He makes a lot of money. And, you know, he has a great sense of humor. But he comes home and he beats his wife and kicks the dog. There's something wrong. That person is not healthy. And so it's the same way here. You know, that completes the picture. Trusting God is a very important aspect. We know that there's plenty of studies, and we'll go through a few of them when we get to that later in the week, that show that people that trust in God have lower blood pressures, they have lower stress rates, less depression, less anxiety, and things like that. So we'll look at that as we get there. So as we're beginning our topic tonight, we're looking at the difference between prevention and therapeutics. And so what do I mean by this? So prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's basically what we're talking about here. Therapeutics is all about you coming to me as a patient with diabetes and I need a refill on my medications. I need my metformin, I need my atorvastatin, I need my blood pressure medicine. That's therapeutics. And we're going to look at a study this evening that kind of addresses that and how effective therapeutics really are as compared to prevention. We find that prevention is much more effective. And when we actually have problems that we need therapeutics for, we find that when we implement the 8 Natural Doctors, a New Start program in people's lives, we can reverse an awful lot of lifestyle disease. And so we've successfully done that. The problem is that most of the foods that most people eat are very high in fat. And so this is kind of, you know, remember the color wheel I showed you last night with all the beautiful colors and the foods and things? This is kind of not very colorful. It's kind of gray, beige, blah. Doesn't really have a lot of color, doesn't have a lot of nutrition, but it does have a lot of fat and a lot of protein. And that is one of the big problems that we have in today in our society and why there's so much lifestyle disease. So we're overloading our bodies with fat and protein, and we'll look more closely at that this evening. But in the beginning, it wasn't that way. God did not institute a diet that was harmful to the human body. He gave us a diet that made the human body work most efficiently and most healthfully. In Genesis 1:29 says, God said, behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, and to you it shall be for meat or food. That's your food. In Genesis 2:16, every tree of the garden you may freely eat. And so God intended mankind to be able to go into the garden and eat freely of the trees that were found there. And in Genesis 3:18, after sin had come onto the scene, he added the herbs of the field to our diet, which we know as vegetables. So he didn't give us vegetables in the beginning. He gave us fruits and nuts and seeds, and vegetables came later. And I shared this text with you last night. This is a special text to me. It has a special meaning to me. Beloved, I wish above all things that you may prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers. So how can we do that? Well, I went to Loma Linda University School of Medicine and graduated from there. And I have fond memories of the place. Went through a lot of training, and actually this is a fairly old picture. It's really growing and changing. I should add a newer picture to it. But while I was there, Dr. Lamont Murdoch was a professor while I was there, and he used to tell us, he was in the School of Medicine, he used to tell us, faulty genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. And you probably more modernly heard this quoted by Mehmet Oz and even Dr. Esselstyn are quoting my professor from medical school. So they're all beginning to recognize the same thing. Dr. Esselstyn is a world famous cardiologist. Actually, I'm not sure he's a cardiologist. I think he's an internist, but he deals with cardiology. He worked at, I want to say, Cleveland Clinic, or was the head of Cleveland Clinic, which was known for its cardiology stuff. But anyway, he's well known, written many books, and now he he has been quoted saying the same thing. What does that mean? Genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. Well, you know, we're all born with certain predisposition to genetic defects. Some of us have diabetes that run in our family. In my family runs obesity genes. And so most of my family is pretty hefty. They're big folk. We have a lot of heart disease, stroke, and high blood pressure that runs in our family, which is really, I think, a consequence of our genetic that predispose us to be heavy. And so I decided at a very young age I didn't want to follow that, and I did a lot of reading and found this vegetarian diet. I actually found a woman who I married who was a vegetarian, and she tricked me into becoming a vegetarian, but it was the best thing she ever did for me, so it turned out to be quite good. So, but a lot of exercise, a lot of good diet over the last 40-some years has really helped me to maintain a reasonable body habitus so I don't look like the rest of my family. If you look at a family picture, you'll see there's a lot of pretty heavy people in our family. So it has helped me a lot. So the standard American diet kind of featured in those pictures we looked at in the beginning. I like the acronym SAD because it's a SAD diet. Standard American diet. It's high in refined foods, high in fat content, 40 to 50% on average, and high in simple carbohydrates and very low in fiber. And all of these elements play a part in why we have a lot of lifestyle disease and how that happens. So when we look at the SAD diseases, Standard American Diet diseases that it's related to, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, osteoporosis, arthritis, some forms, probably a lot of forms of cancer such as breast, colon, pancreatic, fibromyalgia now, chronic fatigue syndrome, all been linked to our lifestyles. And so how we live is going to really determine whether or not, even though we're genetically predisposed to certain diseases, whether or not we actually get them. So lifestyle pulls the trigger. Genetics only loads the gun. And so whether or not we pull that trigger will be determined by how we decide we're going to live our life. So I'd like to look at that. I showed you this slide last night, or one similar to it actually. This looked at obesity rates in the United States starting in 1990, looking in 1995, and again in 2005, 10 years later. And you can see the progression of obesity as time passes. And it actually happens very quickly. I think one of the interesting things that can pinpoint the beginning of when this started back in the 1970s, when the United States government told us that beef was very unhealthy. You remember that? Some of you that were alive remember they told red meat is bad. And what did they say instead? You should eat white meat. It's much healthier. So the average American that was eating 4 to 6 ounces of red meat on average daily began eating 10 to 12 ounces of white meat. And I'll tell you, on a macronutrient level, protein, cholesterol, fat, there's not a lot of difference between the two. So they say, well, you know, the white meat has got less fat in it. Okay, when you're looking at the beef, that's like 60% fat. The chicken is more like 40% fat. But how much fat is in a tomato? You know, like 1% or 2%. So there's a drastic difference between plant-based foods and the amount of fat that they have in them versus animal-based foods. And so there's not a lot of difference. And you can actually track the obesity epidemic in our country to that statement released by our government. And what's interesting, too, is to note that during this time, from 1994 to 2004 and onward, we continue to track these things, we see the same progression in diabetes. So as the obesity epidemic broadens, the rates of diabetes go up. Well, that makes sense. I know that in my practice, and when I'm monitoring patients with pre-diabetes or those that are diabetic, I know that when their weight goes down, their A1C goes down. I know that when their weight goes up, their A1C goes up. And most of the time when their A1C goes up, I can almost guess, have you gained some weight since I saw you last? And most of the time that's true. So they correlate very well. And so we see it here as the CDC has been tracking this over the years. Here in 2020, the rates are crazy, crazy. This is the obesity rates. And you can see now that we're looking at places in the United States where there's 40%. And this was a couple years ago, it's still going up. So it's causing an epidemic. We have a pandemic going on. We've got an epidemic in the United States of obesity and lifestyle diseases, and they are on the rise. And as we correlated last night, we saw how the risk factors for both infectious disease morbidity and mortality correlates with the same risk factors for chronic disease and obesity. So if we can get our obesity and lifestyle diseases under control, guess what we're going to do? We are going to be able to boost our immunity, our immune system, so that we can better withstand COVID-19 or other bugs that may come along. Did anybody see in the news recently, we're now looking at a new bug coming out. What is that? Monkeypox, yeah. And so, great. Just what we need, another one, right? All right. So here's what I was talking about earlier in a surveillance study. We took patients with diabetes, hypertension, obesity, osteoporosis, and constipation. And by the way, constipation is one of the premier markers for people that eat a standard American diet. And most of them will tell you, well, I have bowel movement every day. It's true enough, but when you take an x-ray of their belly, you'll find that they're full of stool. There's nothing but stool in here. And so there's something called slow transit constipation. So most people think of constipation, I haven't gone in a few days. Well, slow transit constipation happens when people eat the standard American diet and it takes 72 hours or longer for it to be eliminated. Whereas in a vegetarian or a vegan, you're talking about 24 to 30 hours. What happens to the gut under those kinds of circumstances is rather fascinating because as the food moves through the gut more quickly, there's less pressure in the gut, and so we have less hemorrhoids, less constipation, we have less diverticulosis, diverticulitis disease, and other functional disorders of the gut. And so the fiber and the water in the food content is very healthy for our gut. Our gut adapts to that and works at its optimum with a vegetarian diet. So we're looking at these people, and what we wanted to do, we wanted to take a 2-year period and we wanted to look at the standard medical regimens that are giving them and measure how many people are actually cured. Do you know what that is? What percentage of people are actually cured by following the standard treatment regimens when you go to see your doctor? Any guesses, any ideas?
Probably none.
None, 0, you're right. 0% of people were cured of their disease. They weren't able to reverse their diabetes, nothing good happened. But when we put them on the New Start program, do you know what the percentage of people are that get better? I told you that last night. All of them. Everybody gets better. Now, not everybody's cured, but everybody gets better. And that's a stark contrast when we look at the way standard medicine treats people. So there are over 330 million sick people in the United States, and you're probably thinking, well, isn't there about 330 million people in the United States? And so are you saying that all people in the United States are sick? And I'm saying, yes, I am, or very nearly. To prove it, almost all people over age 30 are overweight, and a large portion of them, over 37% now, and approaching 40%. I read 40% the other day, of Americans are obese. This increases their risk for lifestyle diseases. Also increases your risk for dying from COVID. Comment.
Definition for being overweight as opposed to obese.
Yes, that's a very good question. So there is a normal range of weight. And we like to say between 20 and 25, and 21, 22, 23 in there is really optimum weight. That's your BMI. And so BMI takes into account your height, your bone structure, things like that. And so when we look at a BMI of 25 or higher, up to 30, that is the overweight category, 25 to 30. Obese starts 30 and higher. So we have 3 categories of obese. We have mildly obese, we have moderate obese, and we have morbid obese, which is a BMI of 40 or higher. And so, and there's a lot of people in that category. And I kind of want to explore tonight why that's happened. We talked already about the government interference and telling us that red meat was bad and white meat is better, and since it's a health food, we'll just eat more of it, and it's just too many calories. And that's one of the things I want to explore with you this evening. So let's move along here. So it really starts with birth. We tend to, mostly as a society, we're kind of a on-the-go society, and you know, fast food, fast this, fast that, and breastfeeding really doesn't fit into that so well. You know, it's better to have a bottle you can just kind of throw it in the infant's mouth and keep going. And it's become more popular since I was in my 20s and 30s, but it's still, you know, it's not what's going on. So when we look at baby formula, 60 times risk of increase of pneumonia with babies that are formula fed versus babies that are breastfed. And interestingly enough, what was the latest crisis we had? No formula. And you know, in all fairness, not every woman is able to breastfeed. Some women just cannot do it. And you know, for them, formula is a must and it's a necessity. But an awful lot of women that give their babies formula could breastfeed. And maybe this crisis wouldn't have happened if we had more breastfeeding moms. So, just saying. It increases your risk of sudden infant death syndrome 2 to 4 times. There's a 10-fold increase in hospitalization in the first year of life. They have lower IQ scores by an average of 10 points. That's quite a bit. 10 points is a good deal. Behavior and speech difficulties increased, and increased risk of infections and things like eczema, asthma, type 1 diabetes. So, Time magazine did a spread. This is kind of old. That date is like 2005 or something like that. Anyway, our supersized kids, and so they're recognizing the problem as well. So they did an expose on this thing, their special health issue, and they examined the lifestyle issues in our society. And they said it's not just genetics. Remember, genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger, but diet. They recognized in this that there's a dietary problem in the United States, which is eye-opening, and we need to see more of that in our education and our information that we receive. So the CDC names the consequences of childhood obesity. More immediate health risks, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, which are risk factors for cardiovascular disease, increased risk of impaired glucose tolerance. This is what causes diabetes, insulin resistance, and type 2 diabetes. Breathing problems such as asthma, sleep apnea. This was just in 2016 it was published. So you can, actually, I think you can still find that on the CDC website. So we know this, we know these connections, but yet we continue to fuel the dairy industry, the meat industries, and so on and so forth. And they continue to have large portions of our grocery store. And so I like to tell people, you know, we get from the grocery store what we pay for. If we go into the grocery store, we're willing to pay for this or that item. That's what they're going to give us. They're all about marketing. They're about making money. And so what we are willing to pay for, they're willing to put on their shelves. And so we need to be thinking about that as well. In a recent study by pathologists, they actually have found that obese children have been found to have arteries of adults. And they're saying this is the first generation in modern history that is not going to outlive their parents in the United States. And they're predicting things like coronary artery disease, congestive heart failure in the 30s. And I can tell you, I have a family member who's in his, I think he's about 40 now, and he's had congestive heart failure since he was age 35. But he weighs 500 and some pounds. See, it runs in my family, so. And so that's what happens. So these numbers I need to update. 32% of all American kids are overweight. It's a little more than that now. 90% of these kids have avoidable risk factors for heart disease. What do I mean by avoidable risk factors? Yeah, lifestyle changes. Instead of sitting and watching, games going on their computer or whatever, they could be outside playing hide and seek like we used to do when we were kids, running up and down the neighborhood and just having, outdoor activity. So there are modifiable risk factors for these children. Food consumption in the United States averages about 3,800 calories per person. That's the whole society as a whole, averaging it per person. I eat about, probably about 16 or 18, maybe up to 2,000 on some days. So somebody's getting the rest of my share, So the average adult, according to the United States government statistics, only needs 2,350. And I have to tell you, I run a lot, and I'm very active. And if I ate 2,350 calories a day, I'd probably be gaining weight slowly. And so that's probably a little too high for us. So, and when you eat a plant-based diet, how much lettuce would you have to eat 2,350 calories? That would be about 23 and a half pounds. I don't know if anybody can do that, but you'd have to have a very large stomach to do that. So, as we look at these types of plant-based foods, we can see that there's a caloric dilution that naturally occurs here. So we can have more food that is healthier for us, and we will look more at that probably tomorrow night. And we'll see that we get better nutrition, less calories, we can maintain our weight, and continue to be active well into our 80s and 90s and centurion states. So the skinniest state in the U.S. is Utah at 21%. It's actually a little higher now. The heaviest is Washington, D.C., which is actually a little higher. These statistics are about 4 or 5 years old now, so I need to update them. So it brings us to what I want you to know and understand tonight. All of this stuff is great background, and it's wonderful and everything, but this is what I want you to understand. If you take home nothing tonight, please take home this. Is it true that obese people eat too much? I hear yes, I hear no. Let's explore this topic a little bit more. There are 2 million species on Earth. There may be more than that now. And only 3 have a weight problem. Now, this should be hidden. You shouldn't be able to see this, right? But I don't have my animations going. So, who are they? Humans, dogs, and cats. Okay. What do they have in common?
Sedentary lifestyle.
Humans. They all have humans in common. Okay, so humans feed the dogs, they feed the cats, and all 3 have weight problems. You think of a giraffe wandering around out in the... They don't have weight problems. They eat what they're supposed to eat, and they never get fat. They don't have obesity problems. They don't get diabetes. Cats and dogs get diabetes, by the way. Yeah, horses do too. So you maybe could add horses to that list. But 2 million species on Earth, only 3 of them with weight problems. That's kind of interesting. Other species do not have to eat less to maintain their weight. The elephant, the sperm whale, the blue whale, the whatever big animals you can think of, they don't even think about dieting. They don't think that they have to run more or that they have to eat less. They don't think about it. They just do what they were designed to do. They eat the way they were designed to eat. And so the way our bodies are designed to eat, we are designed to be vegetarians. We are not designed to eat meat. Our guts cannot handle it. Our kidneys do not stand up to the high levels of protein that we metabolize in our diets in standard American diet. So does eat less and exercise work? Any physicians in here? You tell your patient, sometimes I get a physician in and I ask them, so when you tell your patient, does eat less and exercise more work? And they will tell you, no, it doesn't work, because they don't do it. That's what happens. Patients don't do it. They just don't do it. And so it probably would work if they did it, but they don't do it, so it doesn't work. Animals eating to their full satisfaction in their natural environments or niche will, over time, neither eat too much or too little to maintain their optimal health. They eat just what they're supposed to, what they're designed to eat. So physiology is great. I believe that we should know a lot more, even the lay people. You should know a lot more about physiology than what we know on average. So you can go to a common physiology. Man, that is an old slide. I haven't updated this slide deck in 5 years, so we need to change that. So physiology show in 64 years that I have eaten about 64,000 pounds of food. You get the correction? So if I were 1% short, in other words, if I ate 1% less than that 64,000 pounds, I would be seriously malnourished. Look it up in the physiology books. This is common knowledge. If I ate 1% more than the 64,000 pounds, what's 1%? 64,000 pounds, that's 640 pounds more food over my 64-year lifespan. What would that mean for me? I would be approximately 64 pounds overweight. Okay? That's over my lifetime. And that's how it happens, right? Most of us, we don't get heavy just like overnight. It's over a lifetime. And we all fight the battle of the bulge, right? And so as we get older, it gets harder. And so there's a reason for this. So let's move on here. How is this engineered? Well, there are natural mechanisms that God has built into our hardwiring. The Bible says in Psalms 139:14, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Amen? We are. Marvelous are thy works, that my soul knoweth right well. But fearfully and wonderfully made. So I'd like to look at the physiology and the anatomy of our body just a little bit and how digestion works. So physiologically, the body weighs the amount of food by stretch and nutrition receptors. So it can count the nutrients that we put into our body, and it can count the mass of food that we put into our body. And both of these receptors send information back to our brain that tell us, you're full, don't eat anymore. So if we're eating what we were designed to eat, the physiology is going to work just the way it's supposed to, and your brain's going to be told, you've eaten enough, you've got plenty of nutrition, you've got plenty of mass, you don't need to eat anymore. And so these are both volumetric receptors, meaning mass, volume, and nutrient receptors. So let's take a look at this. Gut receptors. So this is a cross-section of your gut. I don't know, take a piece somewhere in the small intestine somewhere. We'll just hack it in half, and we're going to look along the walls, and what we're going to find is there are nutrient receptors, that's what the ends are, and there are stretch receptors, which help us to analyze the amount of food that we're putting in our guts. And what they do is they perform a gut content weighing and calorie analysis. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. If you put 500 calories of food in there, and 500 calories is very arbitrary here, I'm just using it because it's a whole round number. But if you put 500 calories in there and the nutrient and stretch receptors say that's satisfying, it'll say that's enough, thank you very much, and your hunger will go away and you'll be satisfied and you won't eat anymore, and that's it. And that's all because of these receptors and the hardwiring in our body. So let's take an example. If we look at an apple is 5/6 fiber. That's almost all of it, 5/6 fiber. And water. 1/6 are carbohydrates. And calculating at 300 calories per pound of apple, based on the carbs being 1,800 calories per pound, if we eat this apple and it weighs a half a pound, then you just put 150 calories in the gut. And the gut precisely analyzes this food and knows that it needs, we're using again that 500 calorie figure as just an arbitrary baseline, it would know that it needs 350 more calories to be satiated. Isn't that amazing? And before you say, well, what about I got a thyroid problem? What if I have a thyroid problem? Well, about 1% of people that have weight problems have a thyroid problem. The other 99% do not. 1%. Wow. Okay? So let's look at this a little more carefully. We have two guys up here. We have one with this body habitus, and we have one with this body habitus. And we want to look at what might be the difference, what might explain why they have this different body type. So this one here may have a normal number of nutrition and stretch receptors, and when they eat 500 calories, they say, thank you very much, I'm not hungry anymore, and everything shuts down. And they go along their merry way, and they maintain a healthy body habitus. Just like the elephant roaming around out there eating leaves and grass, it just eats as it goes, and it maintains its optimum weight without even thinking about going on a diet or having to run laps, okay? But what about this person here? Maybe we have less nutrient receptors, less stress receptors, and what happens when they put 500 calories in there, it only measures it as 400 calories, and so they need a little more calories to feel satiated. So, processed foods fool receptors. How does that happen? Well, when we process a food, we take all the fiber out. So we get all the protein, we get the simple carbohydrates, so we get all the calories, but we don't get all the nutrition and fiber. And so we're fooling our bodies into needing more calories. It thinks we're not getting enough. So we get low nutrition, lots of calories, and they all come in a nice little snack compact size. So you can put them in your purse or pocket and carry them around with you and eat them when you need that little snack, right? Yeah, you all know what I'm talking about. So processed foods understretch the gut. So people are not eating too much. Remember the question, do people eat too much or do they eat too many calories? They do not eat too much. They're eating too many calories. That's the problem. They're eating too many calories. Now, there's probably a few gluttons out there that really, just bring in lots and lots of food. But for the most part, most people that are overweight and obese, they're not eating too much food. They're not. I have patients come in and tell me, I hardly eat anything. And I can't lose weight. It's because they're eating the wrong foods. And so we talk about that. I do an illustration like this. This is about how big your stomach is. You can fill this stomach up with the most calorically dense food on the planet and put 4,000 calories in there. Or you could fill it up with fiber and water and put no calories in there. Or if you want some nutrition, you could put lettuce in there. And you might have about 50 calories. That's a big difference. So we're going to look more closely at that here in just a minute. So everything comes on a caloric density scale. And so what we're looking at here is we're looking at a caloric density of 0 down here, and this is calories per pound. So we're looking at a pound of water and fiber has 0 calories. We're looking at a pound of salad has 100 calories. We're looking at a pound of vegetables has a couple hundred calories. We're looking at a pound of fruits with a 300. We look at oil. Oil is the most calorically dense food on the planet. This is why Weimar teaches us to use it sparingly, because it's so calorically dense. And people all come and, well, isn't this oil healthier than that oil and this oil and so on and so forth? It doesn't matter what kind of oil it is. They're all 4,000 calories per pound. Whether it's corn oil, olive oil, motor oil, it doesn't matter. They're all 4,000 calories per pound. Okay? So we're not looking at the nutritional value of whether olive oil is better than coconut oil or whatever. We're just looking at it from a caloric standpoint, 4,000 calories per pound. So you ever hear of the olive oil diet? So what I'm trying to illustrate here is people go down, and I guess I'm very sexist here, but I should say people, because everybody does this. They'll go down the salad line and they'll make a really nice salad. You go to the salad bar, nice salad, and they get to the end of the salad bar, and what's there? The dressings. And so they take their olive oil, and it's a good healthy oil, and they'll just put that oil all over the salad, and they just added 1,000 or 1,500 calories of oil to their 200 calorie meal. And so then they say, I can't lose weight. No, you can't, not when you eat like that. Okay, so let's look at some science behind all of this. In my family, we're all obese genes. So this is us right here. That's my family. Then there are people that have average genes. They don't have the problem of the obesity and overweight that my family has. And then there are people with skinny genes. And these are those people, they go around, they eat everything on the planet, and they don't gain an ounce. And you hate them, right? It's just not fair. But you know what? They get cancer and other things too. So we have to be thinking more broadly than that. But what does this mean in terms of the amount of concentrated foods that these different genetic types can eat? See, the person with the skinny genes, they can eat a high amount of caloric density and still stay skinny. But if the average gene guy or person does that, they're going to be moderately overweight or maybe even obese. And if the person with the obese genes does that, they're going to be really heavy. So what this tells us is that the caloric density of the foods that we're putting into our body is determining what our genetics are going to do to us, right? Genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. And so we're talking about modifying our lifestyle in such a way that we can look like this person and be healthy for 100 years. That's what we're talking about. And that's how it happens. And that's why Loma Linda is a blue zone. These people eat vegetarian diets. They are active, and they just don't have large body habituses. And so they live longer. They live healthier. So I do believe in universal health care, a vegan diet for everyone. Honestly, if we there's a study, they did this about 8 or 10 years ago. They calculate that if every American went on a vegan diet, we would have 3 to 7% of the lifestyle disease that we have now. What would that do for health care in the United States? Yeah, and I'd love that to happen. I'd love that to happen. I could do something else, but it wouldn't bother me a bit. I'm almost to retirement anyway, but it doesn't matter. But I would love for that to happen. Everybody go vegan. And, it doesn't begin to even address water shortage, not enough food in the world, a starving planet. All those issues will go away. The United States has a fraction of the world's population. We have, 340 million? How many billion are there now? I've lost count. 8 billion? 8 billion. Yeah, 8 billion. That's a tiny fraction. We use 25% of the planet's resources. That's amazing. And we could turn that all around, and we'd all be healthy and happy. And we could live on this planet together. And I showed you this last night. Even Kaiser in their Permanente journal says that to improve your health outcomes are becoming more involved in helping their patients adopt healthier lifestyles. Healthy eating may be best achieved with a plant-based diet, which we define as a regimen that encourages whole plant foods, discourages meat, dairy products, eggs, and refined processed foods. So they got it, they know it, and the medical industry, we know this, but we still don't come out and fully advocate this. So when I was in private practice, this used to be an illustration. I would sit down with my patients, every one, and I would tell them the difference between the standard American diet, the SAD diet, and the biblical vegan diet. And I would put it this way, Western versus vegan. We use more plant-based as the more generic term now. But look at the difference. 40%, more than 40% fat, largely animal products. No animal products, 10 to 20% fat. When you eat a 2,000 calorie meal of the standard American diet, your body is so efficient because it's supposed to be breaking down plant foods, not animal foods, that it will absorb about 95% of the calories you put in there. So if you put in 2,000, you're going to absorb about 1,950 of those calories. It's going to go into your bloodstream. Whereas with a vegan diet, if you eat 2,000 calories, and I can't even imagine sitting down and eating a 2,000 calorie vegan meal. It's just the amount of food would be like gigantic. But if you could do it, the amount that you'd be ingesting, only 75 to 85% efficient in absorbing those calories, which means when you eat 2,000 calories of plant-based, you're only going to absorb 1,500 to 1,700 calories. That's a huge advantage right there. It's huge. And so your cholesterol, it's going to be more than 200 for most people. Some people have really good genes and they're lucky. They can eat all the steak on the planet and their cholesterol stays at 170. But that's not true of most. Most people, it's going to be well over 200. For the vegan, usually less than 130. Mine stays down between 110 and 130 on my diet. So predisposed to all the lifestyle diseases we talked about, diabetes, high blood pressure, coronary artery disease, obesity, cancer, autoimmune disease. These diseases are rare. In fact, the plant-based person will expect to live 6 to 15 years longer life, healthier and happier. So, vegan diet for weight loss. British Medical Journal in 2014, vegan diet significantly lower LDL. We kind of went through this one last night. Nuts, fiber, vegetarian diets in general reduce coronary heart disease and diabetes in cohort studies. We know this. We know this. The medical community is well aware of this. So I want to read something from Ellen White. I told you I wouldn't focus a lot on her, but sometimes there are things she says that's worth contemplating and thinking about. So in a book that she wrote called Counsels on Diets and Foods, and the reason I mentioned her, remember last night we talked about Pritikin and Cornell University. They used her writings to develop their nutritional programs. So Counsels on Diets, it says on page 383, those who indulge in meat eating, tea drinking, and gluttony are sowing seeds for a harvest of pain and death. The unhealthful food placed in the stomach strengthens the appetite that war against the soul, developing in lower propensities. A diet of flesh meat tends to develop animalism. A development of animalism lessens spirituality, rendering the mind incapable of understanding truth. Now, this is a really serious issue that we're talking about here now, because what's happening here is as we eat these kinds of foods, it's plugging up our arteries, thickening the viscosity in our blood, causing our brains to think slower. And so we can't comprehend things as well as we need to. So this is really important. They've done studies in prisons where they've taken the prison population and taken them off the standard American diet and put them on plant-based diets and seen drastic behavioral changes in the population. And so it improves their population. In fact, Seventh-day Adventists, the church somewhere down in, I think it was Southern California or Arizona somewhere, they were sponsoring one of these programs at a prison. And they were part of that study. And so amazing, amazing results. And so if we're having problems with depression, if we're having problems with anxiety, if we're having some issues like this, the American Journal of Psychiatry published, it's been about 12 or 15 years ago now, that they consider depression and anxiety to be an inflammatory disease. An inflammatory disease. Well, what does that mean? Well, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, stroke, all these things, obesity, they're all inflammatory diseases, and you can put depression and anxiety in the same category, which means, if that's true, we should be able to improve people's depression and anxiety with diet and lifestyle. And in fact, we're able to do that. Dr. Neil Nedley has written extensively on this subject and has been able to put out programs where churches can participate in to help people with their depression and anxiety. So one of the most common questions I get is, but where do you get your protein? And my answer is always this guy. He doesn't care where he gets his protein. He eats leaves and he eats grass. And he doesn't look like he's lacking in protein anywhere. So I don't worry about that. The problem is that the standard American diet has way too much protein. There's some tips on how you should eat, and we're thinking about, remember that chart of caloric density where fiber and water was over here and lettuce and these things? Eat those things first. Let them occupy the space in your stomach before you put the heavier foods on top. So salads first, veggies second, concentrated carbs, or maybe that should say complex carbs next. Nuts last. Avoid analog meats. Do not eat meat, dairy, or processed foods of any kind. And I showed you this last night and went through this study, but this is what happens to cholesterol rates. 6 weeks on a vegan diet, 110-point loss. And I think that slide has always impressed me. And people say, well, what about the essential amino acid content in your food? It's impossible to get a whole protein. Well, that's nonsense. You just eat a colorful rainbow diet. You're going to get all the essential amino acids. And here's places that you can get them all. And so just eating some beans and brown rice is a whole protein. So it's not that hard. It's not that difficult to do this. There's actually a place called Murder Burger. I don't know if you've ever seen it before. It's in Sacramento. But I love their slogan, so good, they're to die for. And I think that should bring some meaning to what we've learned this evening. That as we eat this way, we are really putting our bodies in the worst possible health position we could. So again, the problem is the animal protein content. The SAD diet, too high in protein, concentrated protein, leads to all of our lifestyle disease and promotes atherosclerosis. And by the way, I didn't mention this. Well, I did, but I didn't emphasize it. When they did this study, they weren't looking at fat content. They were looking at protein. Just protein, not the fat. So anyway, China study, we talked about that last night, leads to cancer. A lot of people shop here, but we know that through studies in the Seventh-day Adventist Health Study, the use of meat less than 1 time a week is assigned a risk ratio of 1, and I'd tell you, don't ever eat it. It's just not worth it. But 6 or more days per week you eat meat or animal products, you have a 4-time increased risk of getting diabetes. And so you should shop here instead. It's look at the colors again. It's beautiful. Color food's important. We talked about the brownness of the standard American diet versus the colorful foods, fruits and vegetables and wonderful things that we can eat, and remind you this is what God gave us in the beginning, and I think we should embrace it more than we do. Do you have any questions this evening? Wow. I was either totally convincing or totally lost everybody.
Can you go back about 4 slides?
Sure can. So right about here.
Yeah, yes. Abandoned meat, flour, and sugar.
Yes. So I attended a lecture once by this guy who's fabulous. He wasn't even a scientist. He was a journalist. But this guy was so into his research in insulin pathways, he knew more than the scientists did. So the scientists invite him to come and speak at their conferences, and he's really good at this. And what he noted was that he said at the beginning and at the end of his lecture, he said, if I could give you one piece of advice, abandon flour and sugar. And I add the meat, because he's not a vegetarian. But
Can you expand on the flour?
yes, I will happily do that. So meat, flour, and sugar are all inflammatory substances. And when I talk about meat, I'm not talking about just your steak, your chicken, your fish. I'm talking about your cheese, your yogurts. All of those things are in the meat category. They are animal products. They're all inflammatory. What the inflammatory foods, and I hesitate to use the word food because they're really more like poisons, but what the inflammatory foods do is they turn on the insulin pathways in your body. All diseases are linked to turned on insulin pathways. Excellent lecture. I wish I could remember his name for you, but it slips my mind. It was too long ago. But that's why.
Are we talking about whole wheat flour? Are we talking about all flour?
Yeah, all flours. So you can,
Everything.
yeah, you grind something up into a flour and it becomes 1,800 calories per pound and it becomes very inflammatory.
So if you have like amaranth stuff,
It doesn't matter. Grind up anything and it's 1,800 calories per, any grain. 1,800 calories per pound and it becomes very inflammatory. Same thing. Grind them all up. What's going on here? Why is that happening? Yes, we're processing a big amount down into a small amount. When we mill flour, oats, wheat, you're taking a big amount and you're making it into a small amount. What do? We grind up all that fiber, and we can even process the flours and make them, bleach them white and get rid of all the fiber and everything. Those things are almost sugar. And that's what happens when you ingest them into your body. The amylase, we have 16 different copies of amylase genes in our body. Quickly turn it. Have you ever taken a cracker, put it in your mouth, just let it sit there? What does it do? It melts, and then what happens? What happens? It turns sweet. It's turning the carbohydrate into sugar. Leave it in your mouth long enough, it will turn sweet. That's the amylase in your saliva. And that's what happens when you put it in your body. This flour almost immediately turns to sugar, which is very inflammatory. Okay? Any other questions? All the good stuff. I can't have it anymore. There's better stuff. God made better stuff. Yes, sir.
Could you eat too much fruit? Like strawberries, raspberries?
I have a hard time imagining that. You might get the runs from some things if you eat too much, but you know, you think about it, God said you could freely eat of those trees in the garden, so tree fruits would be pretty hard to eat too much.
Your blood sugar wouldn't go up.
You know, your berries and things like that, the little sweeter stuff maybe. But that's one of the things we teach our diabetics. So if you're a diabetic, type 2 diabetic, or type 1, it doesn't really matter, you should limit your fruits to 2 a day until you've reversed your disease. And then you can start to add fruits as you can continue to keep your blood sugar under control. But I've seen lots of people do it. So.
what about in the case if someone with cancer?
Well, see, again,
I heard that the cancer eats.
it loves sugar. It loves calories. So it's after the calories. So it's feeding a machinery that doesn't shut down. That's what cancer is. You've turned on a cell so it continues to divide and divide and divide and divide and divide ad infinitum until it kills you. And what the cancer does, it steals all the nutrition out of your body. And so what we want to do with cancer is we want to starve it for calories and give it high amounts of nutrition. That's why when Weimar gave the juices to people, the green juices and so forth, they were able to put weight on because they were starving the cancer. Okay? Any other questions? Please.
So no bread in this diet.
You know, bread is okay. How much bread do you want to eat? Is that going to be your main staple, you know? Yeah, there you go. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with bread. Just remember where it falls on that caloric density. If we're trying to lose weight, that might be one of the things you want to get rid of, right? If you're a diabetic and your sugars aren't very controlled, you definitely don't want to be eating bread. We want to do something different, whole grains. So again, going back to what I mentioned last night, whole plant foods eaten whole. So rather than grinding up your grains into flour, make a cereal out of them. Eat them whole, boil them up. Do something else with them. You can really make them taste good. And they can become very soft and yummy. So.
What do you eat for breakfast?
What do I eat for breakfast? My favorite breakfast is a bowl of granola and fruit, and I have lots of different fruit in my house. So we keep mangoes, bananas, apples, the usual kind of things, and lots of berries. And berries are really good for you. You should put berries in your food on a regular basis because they help clean your arteries out. Yes.
Where do you find granola without sugar unless you make your own?
My wife makes a wonderful granola. Yeah.
You get that all has cane sugar or
Yeah.
concentrated sugar.
Absolutely.
What does she use to sweeten the
Various things, bananas, apple juice, grape juice, depends on what she's making. So
What about date sugar?
she will use some date sugar sometimes. But how she does it, she doesn't use the date sugar. She takes the dates and she whizzes that up into a kind of a juice, and that's what she puts it. So it sweetens it that way. So again, we don't want to process our foods that much, but you can process some things. You know, you're going to use your oils and your sugar sparingly, right? So
What about things like monk fruit powder? Now that's a powdered fruit, right?
what fruit?
Monk fruit?
Okay.
Have you tried that?
No.
I try that.
So again, you're processing stuff. So I don't know what the sugar content is in it, but you know, it's like eating dried fruit. Dried fruit is almost like eating candy.
It's a kind of sweetener that is natural, comes from a fruit, and it's supposed not to
Be no sugar, not spike your blood sugar.
not spike your blood sugar.
Yeah, there's some out there like the stevia is the same kind of thing. It
Yeah.
won't spike your blood sugar either.
Monk fruit, though.
Yeah, right. So that's probably okay, you know. The reason that it doesn't spike your blood sugar is because the molecule is too big to be absorbed into your bloodstream. So it just goes through your gut. And if you eat enough sugar like that, it will get rid of your constipation. It'll give you runs because you get an osmotic effect from it. All the water comes into the gut to dilute out the sugar, and yeah. Okay. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you very much. You guys have been very kind, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.